3 decades ago, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers captured my imagination. Like many of my fellow 90s kids, I watched after school, joined the official fan club, and of course, collected the toys. Eventually, I put those toys away, but the flame of my Power Rangers fandom never died. Now, in this milestone 30th anniversary year, I am re-examining the show, its legacy, and the tale of its most legendary ranger across media. It's time to get back to action. Welcome to the series finale of Summoning the ZORDS, a Power Rangers fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Tommy Oliver's post-Turbo journey and ultimate legacy is returning guest from Always Hold On to Arrow, Lance Laster. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited and honored also to be on the finale.
It's a big deal. Now, well, listen, you helped me start this journey over on my other show, Digging for Kryptonite, about a year ago. We did an episode on that Justice League Power Rangers comic book miniseries. It was a little bit of a backdoor pilot on that show to set up this podcast. So it felt fitting to bring everything full circle and have you back for this. There is a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack, as there always is, but especially for this episode. But I want to start with an important question, kind of an obvious softball question, but one that I feel we need to answer on the show, on the record, before all is said and done. So in my little preamble at the start of all of these podcast episodes, I talk about how this show is about, in part, the tale of Power Rangers' most legendary ranger. And though I don't name him, of course, I'm referring to Tommy Oliver. So my question for you is whether or not Tommy is your personal favorite character. In your mind, is he the franchise's most legendary ranger, and why or why not?
I think he is, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was the first Six Ranger, right? And he was also the first, evil one of the Power Rangers franchise that turns good. So like what the Power Rangers thesis, what they're about, working together, friendship, the power of friendship, all that type of stuff, works on the most evil of them, the one that gave them the most trouble out of any villain on the series to date. There's that funny meme of kids today don't know how nerve-wracking it was to watch Tommy give the Power Rangers all they can handle for 5 straight days. And that was a legit thing. That was legit back in the day. So he starts off with a bang, and then he, and a lot of people who might not understand this, who might be younger and didn't grow up with it, don't understand how big of a deal and how big Power Rangers was, and including how big the actors on the show were, because they became worldwide like that. And Tommy, of course, the coolest one when he shows up, becomes that much more so, and then he becomes the White Ranger. Right, and then he becomes, he's the leader. And then he's a Red Ranger twice over, and he'd kind of seen it all, done it all. As far as Ranger's concerned, he's been up against the most villains, got the most W's. Right, his stat list is pretty good. He has the best ZORDS. He had the best weapons, and then just as a character, Power Rangers isn't really all that strong on arcs, right? Like on the show, but dude does go through some changes from when he first starts out to where he ends up, and then we see him later on in his life, when older, and then he takes on the mentor role. Like we actually see that like in an actual show and series, and not many other Rangers, especially at the time, would we want to see come back, but B also it would be fitting for their character to come back, and I think that's why he kind of fills that. The other part is the other aspect of it is that Jason David Frank, rest in peace, was larger than life and was the torchbearer for this franchise for so long. The reason why a lot of these Rangers, the ex-Rangers, are doing as many cons as they are now is because he made it in vogue to do so, because he was doing this for a long time, and he's the one that has had probably the most faith in the franchise. He unconditionally loved it, and supported it and backed it, and obviously they loved him right back, but like there was a genuine connection there. Like he was a good steward for not only his character but the franchise, and so and he took on the mantle of being the most popular Ranger, and he took that very seriously, with fans, with media, and everything. And so, even like we saw this in the wake of his passing, how all these people came out and were talking about how much they enjoyed watching when they were a kid, how much they also still enjoyed him when they were watching it with their kids. Other celebrities and other actors, at cons and stuff, like when all the celebrities are there, like when they're in their lunch break or whatever, all of them would flock to him to get pictures with him, right? You had that. There's that viral clip of Stan Lee interrupting one of his panel sessions to talk to his quote favorite Power Ranger. Like this is Stan Lee talking, right? And so that kind of shows you the level he's at. And I know the fandom, gets in general kind of gets tired of a bunch of Tommy stuff that happens and stuff because they want to showcase other Rangers because they have other series that are favorite. I understand all that. I have other series that are my favorites. I have favorite Rangers and other teams, but there's a reason why when they did ESPN did the Last Dance documentary, it centers around Michael Jordan. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for why certain things center around certain individuals. We study in school about George Washington. We don't study about his brother Matt. All right, so and this is being silly, but you get the point, right? Like there are levels to this, and he's on one of those.
Beautifully said. I agree with all of that. I really would only be repeating what you've just said if I go on further. The one point though that I will echo because I do think it is so important is that long arc of the character. And of course, it wasn't something that was intended from the start, but he kept coming back over
Yeah.
all of those years. And then when you look at that entire journey that he went on, like you said, you got to see him as so many different Rangers. You got to see him in different positions on the team, whether the sixth Ranger or the leader or the mentor.
Hmm.
And all of that. So I think when you look at it in sum, it's like wow, he really kind of ties so much of this together. So yeah, in my mind, obviously, like I said, I say it at the start of all of these episodes, and that's really been sort of a driving theme as I've been deciding what to cover on this show. It's a going through what my personal fan journey has been with the franchise, but also again through the lens of Tommy. And now in this episode in particular, we're beyond where I ever watched as a kid, but I
Hmm.
wanted to delve into Tommy's post Turbo journey, and I found it quite interesting. And I'm excited to talk about it, just to kind of lay it out for the audience as far as what we'll be talking about and what we took a look at in advance of this. So, of course, his 2002 return in Wild Force for the iconic Forever Red episode, which brought back almost, poor Rocky, almost all the Red Rangers from the franchise's history. Then, of course, the DINO Thunder season, where Tommy returned for the entire season as Dr. Oliver and became the Black Dino Ranger. Now, we did not. I know you've seen the whole season. We did not rewatch the whole thing. We watched a selection of episodes, and we'll talk about that. I will tell you though, I had a little extra time, and I ended up watching a few more than I originally planned. So I got a little bit more of the scope of the season, which was really cool.
Yeah.
Then there's the legendary battle from the Super Mega Force season in 2014, the Dimensions in Danger episode from the Ninja Steel season in 2018, and the Soul of the Dragon original graphic novel written by Kyle Higgins, which also came out in 2018. I'm sure we'll also touch on Once and Always, which came out just this past year. And though Jason David Frank did not appear, his character did, so we can at least touch on that. So that gives sort of an overview of this post Turbo journey that we'll talk about. Before we get into that specifically, let me kind of pick up where we left off last time. So in our last episode, we looked at Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, and we
Hmm.
looked at a handful of episodes from the Turbo season, that three-part kickoff arc, Shift into Turbo, and then the two-part Passing the Torch event, where we had the changeover of the Rangers, and of course that was Jason David Frank's departure from the franchise for a time. I want to get your take because we talked about this last time. It felt now again, I didn't watch all 19 seasons, all 19 episodes that he was in. I just watched a few, but even just in the context of that passing the torch two-parter, his exit and the exits of the other, it felt very abrupt. And I was just curious what your memories are of that Turbo season. Did it as you were watching it, however well you remember it, did it feel like it was building towards any kind of departure or transition, or did it kind of come out of nowhere when you were first
um
experiencing it?
when I first experienced it, it didn't come out of nowhere because I think I knew that they were going to be changing, because I kept up with this stuff, and again, this is still when like the announcement of who was going to be moving on and stuff like that was like big news, and it was big news when people found out that he wasn't going to be continuing with the franchise. I just didn't know when. When I rewatched Turbo, I could see that those first few episodes, that first handful of episodes before the transfer, that they were just treading water until they found the cast that was going to replace them and found the story and all and got episodes under their belt. So that's why Divatox and her crew are just planting detonators and not doing anything else and like not even blowing anything up. They're just planting them and the fireworks just go and stop them. It's like everything of consequence in Turbo happens after the power, after they change course. So looking at it with adult eyes, I was like, oh yeah, they're just stalling those first few episodes. And you could kind of tell also on my rewatch of it that the actors were kind of done. They were ready to move on to do other things. With their life, and that's that was kind of the message in their departure, and I totally get it. I always kind of headcanon it that those first Turbo episodes, because they graduate in the pilot
Mm-hmm.
of Turbo, they graduate high school, and so my headcanon is those first, like, what is it, 19 episodes,
Mm-hmm.
that's summer, and then they're about like, and then those Rangers that leave, they go to college. That's always been my headcanon. And of course, when years later, when he's Dr. Oliver, I was like, okay, the math kind of maths that works.
On that note, so in the Passing the Torch two-parter, there's no mention of where Tommy is going. I was curious. In those 19 episodes, he gets really into stock racing, and he's on the he's in the race car a lot. But was there any mention in those Turbo episodes of him going off to MIT or like anything? Did it point to that at all, as far as you remember? No.
No, because remember they spend a lot of that time, they spend a lot of that time establishing Justin.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gotcha. You know what, though? I'll reiterate what I said in our last episode. At least from the movie and the few episodes that I watched, I think my expectations were so low for Justin because I had heard nothing but terrible things that I watched the movie and those episodes, and I was like, it's fine. I wasn't so put off by him.
Yeah, I was when I was little, right? But when I was an adult, I understand. And kind of like the same thing with Jake Lloyd. It's not his fault that he was cast in a big thing as a kid, playing, like playing a somewhat like an iconic role or something that adults are into. It's not his fault, because when he was approached, and when Blake was approached to be Justin, and then if your approach is like, "Hey, do you want to be in a Star Wars movie?" You're not going to say no. And like if your approach as a kid and somebody says, "Hey, you're going to be a Power Ranger. You're going to be on Power Rangers," the kid's like, "Cool." He's like, "No, but you're going to be a Power Ranger." Is the kid at that time going to say no? That's going to be lame. Adults might think it's lame. No, they're going to be overjoyed. So I can't fault them for that, and I understand the thinking behind it. It just didn't work out to their advantage
That's
and how they
fair.
wanted it.
While we're on the subject of Turbo, I did put the call out to our audience for this final episode if there was anything they wanted to share or ask as we wind down here. So I have a few that I'll sprinkle in as we're making our way through. So from our listener, Rob Matthews, Rob says, why is it that Turbo is often not mentioned or recognized in terms of Tommy's character? He was every bit the Red Turbo Ranger as he was Red Zeo. He just passed the power on. It's barely mentioned in Soul of the Dragon and is completely ignored in the more recent episodes when he fights a copy of himself with the Master Morpher. It's the only power set that wasn't used. Thanks for another great podcast. So, I want to get your take. I've been thinking about this question. I think for me, it's a couple of things. The Turbo season, and this is subjective, but the Turbo season qualitatively was not particularly strong, so that might have something to do with it. Also, he was the Red Zeo Ranger, so when he's sort of scrolling through the different rangers that he's been, you already have red represented, so maybe it would feel a little bit like if he had been the blue Turbo Ranger. I feel like when he's doing the Master Morpher bit, you would see him as that, right? Because it's a different
Mhm.
color. Silly as that might be, but I feel like that has something to do with it. I will respectfully disagree. I mean, I would say he was the Red Zeo Ranger, certainly for a longer duration, right? You had an entire
Mhm.
50 episode season versus the 19 of Turbo. So I feel like that accounts for a lot. What do you think?
Honestly, I think the reason why we don't really group him in that is because TJ is so popular. Um, the guy that he picks and the guy that replaces him, as TJ so proudly states in Forever Red, that he replaced Tommy. TJ's very popular amongst the fandom, and I know personally I was stoked and like almost like jaw on floor when like we have a in the early '90s you have a black guy being the leader of a superhero team. That was unheard of back then. And so from they had me at that point, and plus TJ just so cool, and so I think that's what it is. TJ just owned that, and so even to the point that like when we started Space, people were disappointed. I remember that he wasn't the Red Ranger, Andros was. It's like, why is TJ the Blue? TJ's the leader, but he was still cool even as the Blue Ranger. So I think that's what it is. I think it's TJ's popularity is why people don't really associate Tommy with it. But I do. Tommy is forever invited to the cookout though because he chose a black man to replace him. So Tommy's always that's another notch for Tommy in my book.
No, that's a fantastic point. And I do have to say, even though my experience with TJ is fairly limited, he did grow on me very quickly in just a short amount of time that I did spend with him. And then, especially watching a lot of these reunion episodes, he always comes back. It seems,
He always comes
which is
back.
great. Yeah,
Yep.
I love to see that every time. Like, oh, there he is again.
Yeah, he and
Which
Cassie, but she's not doing stuff anymore because she is a paramedic full time now.
oh, right on, right on.
Yeah.
So, a little bit of business here since this is our series finale. I addressed this a few episodes ago, but again, we're just winding down because I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. And this is sort of the culmination of my Power Ranger fan journey as I've wanted to cover it on the show. And at the same time, like I said, I do encourage everyone to stay subscribed via your audio podcast platform of choice because you never know when there might be an opportunity to go back to action. If we've learned nothing else from from examining the Power Rangers franchise, as I said before, once a as the show says, once a ranger, always a ranger. As we say, once a ranger fan, always a ranger fan. Similarly, once a ranger podcaster, always a ranger podcaster. So there may be an opportunity to come back. I mean, good Lord, very recently we we got the announcement that David Yost would be back for all of the Cosmic Fury season. I knew that he was going to pop in there. I thought it was going to be a little cameo thing. I didn't realize he was going to be in the opening credits and it was going to be a whole thing.
Hmm.
And that season drops on Netflix about 2 weeks after this episode that we're recording. So immediately I'm
Can't
saying to
wait.
myself, why do we come back? Do we do a little epilogue at the end of the year? So I think the odds are fairly fairly good that you'll hear something from Summoning the Zords again in the future. But at the same time, for all intents and purposes, this is our series finale. But do stay subscribed. I really want to thank a few people. I want to thank Perry Constantine and Greg Schiegel, who uh, didn't collaborate, but the pieces came together to form our key art. Greg drew me and Perry drew the Zords, and I love the way it came together. So my thanks to those guys. Basic Printer for letting me use their music for our intro and outro, and I've used their music for a bunch of stuff over the past few years, and they have been endlessly generous with me. So please check them out. I really love their stuff. And then of course all of the guests, including yourself, Lance. I mean, it's been and I'm sure you can identify, with this, with your own show and other shows you've guested on and everything, just the beauty of podcasting generally. It's like, yeah, as a kid watching Power Rangers, I talked to kids in my class about it, right? So it's not like, oh, I never talked to anyone about Power Rangers in my life, but never did I have this level of discussion, get into this depth talking about this with people. So to be able to compare notes about this thing that we grew up with, and I know for you, you've remained immersed in the fandom, has really been fascinating. And so I'm very grateful to all the guests who came on, and everyone just did the homework and came in with such enthusiasm, and it was great to get everyone's perspective. So I'm very grateful to everyone who came to play. And last but certainly not least, the audience. I really appreciate everyone who's tuned in, whether you listen to all of them or you just kind of jumped around to whichever one's interested you the most. I really, I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this so much. Even if no one were really listening, I probably still would have done this because I wanted to go back and look at all of this stuff with a new perspective. But to know that there were people out there who were following along with us really meant a lot. So my immense thanks to all of those folks. Again, including you, Lance. Thank you.
Appreciate it, man.
So I don't know. I know you've listened to at least some of the episodes. I know that I'm putting you on the spot here, but is there anything, what we get wrong, I guess is my question. Like, is there anything or anything that we've talked
Ooh.
about that you want, not that necessarily we even got wrong, but is there anything that we've talked about in the episodes that you've heard where you're like, oh, like I really wanted to follow up on that or talk more about that or clarify or correct or whatever.
Oh, let me guess.
Wait, well,
Oh, well,
but oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
honestly, I think what comes to mind, because I think it was the most recent thing that I was really like kind of amped about, was the Shattered Grid stuff, because I loved those comics. And when they were coming out, like I was waiting for those every single month, like gleefully. Like I was like, foaming at the mouth for those, because I've been reading that run. And then this whole Shattered Grid thing starts, and I was like, this is what I've always said about the comics was this is the show I thought I was watching when I was younger. And to me, and y'all were talking about like, tones of the comic books versus other things, in the show in particular. And I appreciate the comic book tone because, especially like, like the comic book tone that Higgins established and Parrott has taken, and everybody else after them has kind of picked up with. It's the appropriate level of seriousness given to the material in the world, but it still at its core remains what it is. So it's still hokey, it's still zany, it's still absolutely crazy. But you can believe in their world that, oh yeah, this is pretty serious. And like Rita and Zed seem super serious and like legitimate threats, even when they lose, because we know they're going to lose. But they seem like a threat, and the Rangers have to actually scratch and claw to get out of situations. It's not easy like the show makes it seem. And so and the other thing y'all were talking about, we're talking about how y'all became fans of Jason through the comic books, and y'all were talking about like, the Rangers and their personalities, and how like they're kind of, cookie cutter, and they're just kind of bland. You can kind of go anywhere with them. I think that's kind of their beauty, right? Because like they were distinguishable enough in how they're presented, so that way you could do stuff with them. And over time, Jason becomes he's the all American, straight laced like leader type. But then you find out why, like, and what actually motivates him. It's like, oh, that's cool. Kimberly, even in the show, is well developed. Like she has a lot of stuff going on all of the time. But in the comics, it's even more so. The comics has done wonders for Trini. And Zach as well, and well, actually all of them. But like even as past their stereotypical of leader guy, valley girl that's smart, the nerdy guy, and then the goof off. Like with all those things, we understand them as audiences because that has been going on for forever. Like the Seinfeld Four have distinguishable personalities. The Friends Six have their distinguishable personalities, and it's a blank slate to do stuff with them. And that they did the same thing with Power Rangers. Power Rangers is no different from that, which is why I always say that everything's formulaic. So we can't complain about formulaicness. So there's a reason to it. And I think that's the beauty of it. And the comics really take that and and really run with it. I do agree with you that Go Go is a wonderful book. It's it's so good, and the Shattered Grid stuff was, this was before now, because nowadays, the multiverse is all that people are talking about. But in comics, this has been going on for forever, right? And then prior to the multiverse phase of mass media, Power Rangers did this in comic books, and it's brilliant. It's great. And you hadn't watched a lot of seasons, and you both had said this on your podcast. You haven't seen a bunch of seasons, but for somebody who has, there was enough for somebody who'd seen all those things to understand the references, the characters talking to each other, like when the Phantom Ranger is talking to the Magnum Defender, and they make a joke about like not taking their helmet off when everybody else had. That's a nice gag. Stuff like that. Like you appreciate that. You appreciate seeing Jen being a catalyst for events coming in and kind of like letting them know what the time travel stuff is, because everybody loves Jen. Hasbro make a Lightning collection figure of her already. What are you waiting for? and Lauren Sheba. I thought that her pairing with Jason was brilliant. Lauren Sheba was underutilized in Samurai, and they sort of switched it. She should have been legit the first female Red Ranger in that show, and then like the roles of that show should have been reversed. Jaden should have been the one that was kept secret and then screws up, and then Lauren is the true Red Ranger. Like that fits. That should have been her. But anyway, those are my things.
No, right on. What you were saying about the archetypes, right, that the show
Yeah.
utilizes. I'm glad you brought that up because it was something that I was thinking about. I guess I know whenever I've talked about it, I guess it has been more on the negative side. But what I will say is watching select episodes from later seasons, these reunion episodes and legacy episodes, I'm going in cold, right?
Hmm.
To Wild Force. I mean, Wild Force is a little bit different because that was so Red Ranger heavy. It wasn't so much like
Yeah.
you were really in the mix of the regular team. But Super Mega Force and I mean Dino Thunder I watched from the beginning, but then Ninja Steel. And what I did appreciate in those couple of instances was even though I was watching one episode from that season, it's like I knew kind of the deal. I knew the lay of the land, right? And there was a comfort and a familiarity and an accessibility to that. And I
Yeah.
feel like I could, and I don't mean to generalize, and I know certain seasons got more serialized, and I'm not saying I could just watch any episode ever cold,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, I feel like I could jump around, and because of the way the franchise is set up and utilizing those archetypes, you get the gist and you can
Hmm.
kind of get into it. And as I was watching those legacy episodes, I was like, oh, like that's the beauty of this. I felt at home even though
Hmm.
these individual characters were new to me. So I think there's a lot of value in that. I have a correction. So we did an episode on it's sort of a correction because the title of our episode is the Mighty Morphin Super Nintendo game. So the episode really
Okay.
specifically was about the Super Nintendo version. So everything we said still holds true, but it came to my attention after our episode that the Sega versions of the Mighty Morphin game and the movie game
Hmm.
were like vastly different and had most of the things that I was complaining about the Super Nintendo versions not having. And I guess, look, and this is my ignorance as a gamer. Like this is not my world. I did my best. I didn't realize that the games would be that different for
Hmm.
different platforms. But when we were talking about the Mighty Morphin game for Super Nintendo, I'm like, how do you not have the Green Ranger? God damn it. And then I watched the gameplay of the Sega one, and it's like the whole Green Ranger thing. I'm like, oh man. So
That's
I,
funny.
I didn't hear from it. No one was like, how did you not know this? But yeah, sorry about that. And the same thing with with the movie game. With the movie game for Sega, and you're fighting the Tengu Warriors, and I'm like, again, where was this in the Super Nintendo version? My frustrations still hold, but in any event, yeah. So sorry.
That's all good. That's funny though.
I know I was watching it. I was like, oh man, because I remember, and then like it was kind of came to me because I had read when I was reading about the games on Wikipedia. I did remember one of them did. I think it said something about the Green Ranger in the Sega game, but like I didn't in my mind. Like I would have never contemplated that the games would be that significantly different. But
Hmm.
clearly they were, and clearly the Sega versions had what I was looking for and what the Super Nintendo games were lacking. But now I
Hey,
know.
see, the funniest part about this is I was a Sega guy growing up, uh, so yeah, people, it's not around. It's not around today. I'm still a Dreamcast fan, but yeah, put some respect on Sega.
Yeah, no, I know. I really I know. I give them a lot of props because what I saw of those gameplays was very impressive. So that was one thing I did just want to mention. But oh, one other thing, just one last bit of business to our audience. If you haven't left a rating and review of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, please do. We had a couple of folks who left drive-by one-star ratings with no reviews. Just hit us with the one star.
Okay.
It's fine. It is what it is. But I would say I thank you to everyone who has left a rating and review. And if you haven't, please do. Even though this is the end of the podcast, my hope is that people will still continue to find it in the years to come. And hopefully, if they read some great reviews, they'll be inclined to check it out. So I would kindly ask folks to do that if you haven't already. And I appreciate everyone who already has. We still, again, we have to get into Tommy's post turbo journey, but I did just want to ask you, we could do this maybe as like a kind of like a lightning round sort of thing. There are
Okay.
a few things coming up. Amy Jo Johnson's comic,
Hmm.
David Yost has been writing this quantum continuum project that I don't know if that would ever see the light of day, but he's been releasing the scripts. I don't know if you've been following this at all, but
Yeah, no, I back that on Kickstarter.
oh, right, good man. So there's that. We have Jason David Frank's final film project, The Legend of the White
Hmm.
Dragon, which is it was due for release over Labor Day weekend. Last I heard, it was pushed back. I'm not sure what the final release date is going to be, but that is forthcoming. And of course, we have this 30th and presumably final season of this iteration of the Power Rangers franchise before it's
Hmm.
poised for this Netflix reboot. So that's a handful of things that are sort of in the mix. Just curious, I don't know whatever wherever you'd like to go with that. What are you most excited for? What hopes do you have for any of those?
Um, I guess I'll start off with what my hopes are. My hopes are for the Netflix thing is for it to be what I was talking about with the comic books. I hope it has that type of tone because I think that would do extremely well. Not only for the people who have grown up with the show and remember it fondly, but I think even for new people and just and that has a possibility to be like critically pretty good if they do it that way. Uh, Now, as far as some of the other projects, I'm curious to see what they are. I saw some of the sketches for in the characters designs for Amy Jo Johnson's thing, and I was like, okay, this is a. I think I see we're going in the heroes are old type of deal thing again. I was like, all right, let's see what they do. Will it be as cool as like the coinless stuff? I don't know. But we'll see. We'll see what she's like as a writer because she's a pretty good director.
Hmm.
So we shall see how she is as a writer. David Yost thing, like I mean, I'm backing it. So it'd be cool to see you know the fruits of that. And then JDF's project, like before he passed, he was talking about that thing for a long time. So I'm curious to see that, and we might actually cover it on Arrow because Diggle's in it.
That's right. Yes, that's right. I know. I saw
And
with
you
the
know how we
trailer.
do on our podcast, like when characters do other things, we talk about it.
Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about all of these things. I mean, I'll be honest. Something like Legend of the White Dragon on paper, I don't know that I would have been as interested in it, but especially with it being his final project and how much he put into it, and again how much it calls to mind the Power Rangers lore,
Hmm.
even though it's its own thing. I'll definitely be checking that out. Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious for all of it. I I so enjoyed that once and always special that whether it's David Yost's project that brings back original cast members or it's more once and always type specials, whatever the case may be, a direct
Yeah.
sequel or a Zio anniversary special in a few years, like whatever the case may be.
Oh yeah. People were talking about like they would wish that like each season got a once and always. That'd be so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I said this when we covered it, but it was watching that and it was the perfect time, right? Like I just started doing this podcast. I just started going
Hmm.
back and watching the old stuff. And it was just the perfect time. And it just felt like, oh, this was made for me. And
Yeah.
I loved it. And I feel like there's so much potential there. Of course, this begs the question of how they would handle the character of Tommy. And I guess maybe we can kind of tee up our discussion of his post turbo journey because I mean, I don't know. I guess at this point in time, where there's nothing confirmed as far as more projects with the original cast members, right? All we know is we have David Yost in this upcoming season of Cosmic Fury, and then we're getting this reboot, right? So, like, that's kind of all
Yeah.
we know at this point in time. So, if that's it for the version of Power Rangers that we know, and now we enter this new era on Netflix with a new continuity or whatever that ends up being, how satisfied are you, I guess, with the resolution of Tommy's journey to whatever extent you can even call it a resolution based on what we've seen. Um, and this too kind of is an interesting question as far as what we kind of consider the end, because with the character of Tommy Oliver, right, the last time we see Jason David Frank on screen is in Dimensions in Danger during the Ninja Steel episode, though we see the character of Tommy morphed in the
Yeah.
Once and Always special. And then we have the Soul of the Dragon original graphic novel, which shows us Tommy at the furthest point in his timeline, right?
Yes.
So, kind of taking all of that together, if that is it, how satisfied or not are you with kind of where the franchise leaves Tommy Oliver?
Yeah. If that's it, right? And the last thing that we know about him is that at the end of Soul of the Dragon, he and Kat are going off on vacation and just gonna enjoy the rest of their life. That's cool, right? Like he's definitely done enough, right? So I think we're good as far as that's concerned. Now with like seeing him like on screen, or at least seeing Tommy like on screen. I guess in the Once and Always, you know, that last excursion that he had is where he hurt his back. Maybe,
Right.
maybe that's it. Because in the book it did say it was when he was a Green Ranger. So maybe that was the instance that he was using it. And at that point, he would be using a Master Morpher. So okay. Um, but outside of that, if the last time you see him actually, as JDF actually doing stuff, was Dimension of Danger, cool, because he was super cool in that.
He was. Well, so I mean, I guess that's the thing. We talked about how in Once and Always we again they kill off Trini on screen. It ends up the whole episode ends up being this tribute to Twee Trang and her character, and
Mhm.
then of course we get the tribute to Jason David Frank at the end too. I guess on the one hand, as much as I would love more Once and Always type specials, if they were to continue that, unless you only see Tommy morphed, if they do what they did in the
Yeah,
last one, it's like I don't know. I guess I feel like at a certain point you would need to address the fact that he's not with us anymore. So you would have to do something with that character, presumably, obviously, kill the character off.
yeah,
So I guess I wonder, might we be better off quitting while we're ahead? Like,
maybe.
is there something to be said for like, hey, again, we in the context of the franchise, he's as of Once and Always, he's still operating as the Green Ranger, and we have the Soul of the Dragon thing that shows you what happens to him down the line, and he has his old man
Mhm.
Tommy adventure, and he has his happy ending, and maybe that's good. Maybe I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, like the only thing I could think of like is if they do something else where like he was part of a cast that's still doing something, right? Let's say if they did a Zio reunion type of thing, right? It'd have to be when they're older, and then like I don't know, like there's a statue of him someplace, like in front of like SPD headquarters or something. Is it like here, like something like that? They'd have to do something like that, because I don't think they're going to go the route that they did with honoring Twee. I don't think they're going to do that again. So I think they probably stick to something a little bit more subtle.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'll be very curious to see what if anything we get in the years ahead. I'll be very curious. But in the meantime, let's dive more specifically into Tommy's post Turbo journey. So again, Jason David Frank and the character of Tommy depart during the Turbo season, right? And then he doesn't pop up again until the Wild Force season for that Forever Red episode.
Hmm.
I mean, again, I was trying to remember what if I even knew about Forever Red when it happened, and I don't know that I did. I mean, like I've talked about, I was really out of it. It definitely came to my attention at some point years ago, but I don't think it was as it was happening or anything like that. But in any event, how big of a deal was this when this was originally happening?
See, what year was that? Was
2002.
2002. So I knew that they were doing an anniversary special, um, and I kind of figured out when it would be. I didn't know what it was or anything. And then when I finally was able to watch it, um, and like I think I watched it a few days or so, like a weeks after it came out. Somehow, I can't remember how I was able to do that in 2002, but I did. It was like a Saturday morning or something. I think I actually set a tape to record that one because we still were doing that in 2002. I was blown away. I was like, this is the coolest Power Rangers has ever been. This is awesome. And of course, at that point in time, like I was a sophomore in high school, I couldn't talk to anybody about this because nobody was watching, and no people were looking at me sideways. So I could only like tell my mom was like, this was really cool. That was pretty much it.
Yeah, no, it was so cool. I watched it. I think I watched it in full for the first time when we covered Once and Always because I was in that mode and I wanted to check out some of the other legacy episodes. So I watched that and then I watched it again in advance of this episode. And yeah, man,
Oh, I watch it frequently.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
ton of fun. I mean, I would imagine for someone who has watched all the seasons, it has even more resonance because you have that familiarity with all of the Red
Mhm.
Rangers who are represented. But even for myself, not knowing or being invested in all of them, still, you can't help but appreciate how cool it is. And even
Yeah.
just seeing Jason David Frank and Austin St. John together again. I mean,
Hmm.
when they high five each other, and
Yeah.
when they have their reunion moment, I get chills every time I watch it.
Dude, the way they filmed that, like they knew that that was a moment. They knew that that was something significant. And also the fact that like those two at that point in time, I think that's when their beef started. So it's like so they knew, right? But like they working together. They pushed past it to do this episode, but that was a monumental feat to have those two in there and have scenes together and just do whatever. Now it's also very obvious that they made sure that each of them got standout moments because they were part of the original show. But it's kind of funny how they made that work. Uh, but yeah, like they definitely took care in making sure that that was cool and people understood the significance of that.
Yeah, and I'm sure I've said this before, but I do give those guys credit because we've seen other instances, Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel, for example. We've seen
Yeah.
other feuds between actors, and the quote unquote solution a lot of times is, oh, they won't work together, right? They'll be filmed
Hmm.
separately, and it's so obvious as you're watching it. So regardless of whatever was going on between these two guys, they shared that moment on the screen, and it's such a standout, powerful moment. So
It
I give
is.
them credit for, like you said, pushing past whatever it was, because again, we've seen a lot of instances in a lot of other projects where they don't, and it
Yeah.
shows. So that went a long way. What a couple of things that stand out to me with Forever Red, Tommy's role and kind of just like just what he's been up to. It's all very mysterious, right? There's not a ton that's really laid out, right? There's the call that Bulk and Skull get at this poolside resort, like where. No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so this is I think that's the biggest standout thing that like that really occurs with Tommy as far as like what he's been up to, because Bulk and Skull, running whatever little side hustle bit like or not probably not even a side hustle, their actual hustle at this particular point in time, they are scared yet reverent in handing the phone to Tommy, somebody that they knew in high school and did all these things to, and but then like they are like, oh, it's Tommy. We better like we don't want to bother him. Like that's what even Skull says. Like, should we bother him? And he's just kind of there and likely drinking for free, which I think is hilarious. But this is what this particular point in the show. Bulk and Skull obviously they know who he is, but at this particular point in the show, they realize that all of their friends were Power Rangers, and so for people, and they didn't react negatively to it. They embraced it wholeheartedly, because at the spoilers for Power Rangers in Space, they find out then, and so fast forward a few years, they after that moment they kind of realize, oh, so this crew was the Power Rangers, which means that the crew before were also our friends, which means the crew before was our and so they piece all this together, and so that's why like they have this reverence for Tommy, and so I think that's neat with those two in their characterization, and and just the respect that they have because it's like they just realize they're probably like trying to make up for lost time from when like they were bullying him or trying to bully him and just being a pain in his backside. So uh, so yeah, I think that was an interesting thing, and the fact that he's the leader for this mission, and TJ refers to him as a legend. There's a whole end scene where. Cole's like, wow, he really was the greatest ranger ever, and they kind of give him some they rag on him a little bit afterwards, but that's what like deep down like they all think the same thing.
Right. Yeah, it was. Yeah, the Bulk and Skull. It was great to see them again. I've come a
Hmm.
long way. I've really come around on Bulk and Skull. So no,
Hey,
it was
there.
happy to see them.
Have you seen the finale of Lost in Space? I mean, of In Space.
Yes, when they have their big heroic moment. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, see, that's like that. Honestly, makes everything worth it, right? Like you can argue that they are the true heroes of the show, and they've had the biggest character arcs on the show. Because for them to get to that moment, and it's hella cheesy, but it's effective. It's incredibly effective that the people that like leading the charge at that instance was those two, and like that legit completes their character arc as people, and what gets them to that point that you see them uh in Forever Red, and how they are in the comic books as well.
Yeah, it was a great moment. Again, I haven't watched certainly much of Space. I did watch the end, Andros destroying Zordon's tube and the Z
Yeah.
wave that purifies all of the evil in the universe, and Bulk and Skull
Hmm.
having their moment. And yeah, no, that was very satisfying, very powerful. And obviously, the whole business with the Z wave continues to play out across
Yes,
the
it does.
franchise. Yeah. Which is really cool. But yeah, in Forever Red, I know the way that Bulk and Skull regard him. I think on my first viewing, my impression was, do they work for him? Like, is Tommy is Tommy the owner of this resort? But no. But what you're saying, as far as them learning what they did in space, and then that changing the way they would regard him, that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
And but again, this whole, it becomes clear, right? Tommy's still been active, right? And he's uh, again organized this mission. Andros is on the moon, and he's observing I guess, the remnants of the Machine Empire, digging up Serpentera, Lord Zed's
Hmm.
old Zord. And that's what's going to bring all of the former Red Rangers back to action here to go to this moon base and stop them and destroy Serpentera, which of course they do. But yeah, man, it was a lot of fun. But again, at this, I guess what I'm curious about is, like, especially when you watch this for the first time, because yes, later on, obviously Tommy comes back for a whole season. He's Dr. Oliver. You learn more, but I guess at that point in time, was it satisfying enough, or did you come out of Forever Red with more questions than answers? Were there more things that you were like, oh man, I wish they had explained what he had been up to, or more what's going on behind the scenes, or were you satisfied with what they put
Oh
forward?
no, I was satisfied, and at the time I was like, I was thinking to myself, they're never going to do something like this again. This is the coolest that it's ever been. Like, so like we've had crossovers before. Like they had crossovers for the couple seasons prior, right? And then one of them was like pretty bad, like the In Space Galaxy one, super bad. I was like, how is it this bad? No, it wasn't that one. To the 10th Power is pretty cool. I'm talking the Lightspeed Rescue Lost Galaxy one, not
Okay.
good. But the In Space Galaxy one was okay. Well, actually, no, that was good because that had ramifications in it. Afterwards, the Time Force and Lightspeed Rescue one, great. And then and then after this, they did it to us again because they do. There's another crossover in the Wild Force season. It's Time Force and Wild Force, and that one's really good.
All right, right on. Well, kind of on this notion of other reunions. So, okay, one of the things that has come up, and I think has been not even a bone of contention, but a source of confusion among folks like myself, right, who watched the Mighty Morphin era primarily and then stopped, and then we've seen
Hmm.
these legacy episodes where folks come back and they're morphing. And
Hmm.
we had seen instances, particularly in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, where powers were destroyed, right? The initial power source was destroyed. They had to go to get the new ninja powers from Ninjor. Then the coins were
Hmm.
destroyed during the Alien Rangers arc, and that necessitated Zeo. So the idea of the original Mighty Morphin powers being an option for anyone didn't seem possible. Yet, for
Hmm.
example, when Jason comes back in Forever Red, he morphs and he's the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger. Now,
Hmm.
I know that in the space season, Johnny Young Bosch comes back as Adam, right, to give Carlos
Yes.
a pep talk. And I
Yes.
did. I didn't watch the whole episode, but I watched
Oh, that's
Adam's
a good
scene,
one.
and I liked what I saw. And he morphs, but his morpher is all jacked up, and it's very
Hmm.
dangerous, and the powers don't last, right?
Yeah.
And that makes sense, right? Because everything that we saw in Mighty Morphin, it was always such a big deal when, again, power sources were destroyed or transferred, and it all felt very final. So the fact that it was this huge risk for Adam to even morph, that totally tracked. But then again, we get to something like Forever Red, and you see Jason morphing, and it's like, okay, what's the deal here? Tommy morphing into the Red Zeo Ranger, as we talked about when we covered the Turbo movie, it was very nebulous, that whole transition. I know there was a lot of stuff that was cut, but based on what we saw, there was never anything that said they couldn't use their Zeo powers anymore. So I guess that didn't bump me so much. But then as we get further along with these legacy episodes, the legendary battle, and then Dimensions in Danger, and then when Jason comes back again for the grid connection and beast
Mhm.
morphers, and he's access to his old powers. I guess, is there, what am I missing something? Is there some sort of in-story explanation for how this is all possible, or do we just sort of assume whether it's Billy or someone else, like they figured out how to access these powers again, and we shouldn't sweat it too much?
Yeah, you didn't miss anything.
Okay.
And and that's always kind of the thing. Like somebody somewhere kind of figures something out, but they kind of like yada yada over it. My personal headcanon is post Z Wave, right? Because this is when we see a lot of those things. Post Z Wave is uh, you have you start to see Ranger seasons where civilians are accessing the morphing grid and scientists and stuff are figuring stuff out, and so you have like these governmental agencies kind of doing stuff with the morphing grid and making Power Rangers. So it's not that much of a stretch to think that post Z Wave, in the timeline, because this Forever Red happens post Z Wave. So in that time, somebody probably reached out to the former Rangers like, hey, just in case, here's a repaired power coin, just in case. Here you go.
Yeah. That's fine. No, I can get on board with that. I think before I watched a lot of these, when I more just saw maybe saw clips briefly or saw photos, and it was always like, how is this possible? I
Hmm.
guess you know what it is. I think it's just because in the Mighty Morphin era, they trained us,
Yes, they
right?
did.
Where it was such a big deal and it was so final when powers were transferred or powers were destroyed. And so I guess like I've just always had that in my head. But
Mm.
but yeah, no, I can definitely get on board with the idea. Especially too, I think something like Once and Always, where you see Billy active again and he's got his company and it's like you can easily figure like, oh, he's figured out how to do all of this and he's got
Yeah,
everyone set up and it's fine. And the other thing too, just in terms of all these legacy episodes, we want to see them morph, right? And we
yeah,
it's like so you can kind of get past it, so that's fine.
yeah.
But yes, I guess
And
that
then
was a question like, was I missing something? So thank you.
yeah, no. And then the other part of it is a lot of these seasons post Z Wave, they nothing happens to their powers
Right.
afterwards. Like there's not a traumatic effect where like they lose them and they have to become something else again, like what happened with the earlier seasons. Now there's real world stuff that that influence those decisions. But like when Time Force is over, they still have their powers. Same thing with Lightspeed Rescue. They still have them. And at the end of uh, you know Dino Thunder spoilers, they sacrifice their powers, but when they have a crossover the very next season with SPD, there's a way for them to get them back. Like they have to do something to get them back to use them. So it's not like and that's kind of what all these seasons afterwards kind of followed through with. There wasn't like man, we need to go find this a new source of power because that's what happened in the earlier seasons. But then they stopped that when they kind of moved to these other Sentais that had shorter seasons, and they still had their powers at the
No, that makes sense. And so, when we get to some, we'll talk more specifically, but when we get to stuff like Legendary Battle, where you see all the past teams come together, or something
end.
like Once and Always, where the Bandora Protocol is activated and you see Rangers all over the over the world, do you like that idea that all of the past teams, even if they're not regularly out and about, that they're at least on reserve status and they can access their powers and they can jump into action? Do you like that
Yeah,
idea?
no, I do. I do.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty neat.
I do too, and I think to whatever extent, if any, and the answer might be none, but to whatever extent they continue to do these specials, I think that it provides a very seamless way of working in whoever they need to,
I agree.
without wasting time on explaining how the powers are there. So I could put that to rest. That was for a long time. I'm like, how is this possible? But it's like, all right, well, I'll let that go. Yeah, I think for Forever Red, just the idea that Tommy was still operating to some capacity and that he organized everyone and you see the reverence that they have for him. Again, that final
Hmm.
bit when when they're all kind of busting each other's chops, that was a lot of fun. The moment
Yeah.
with Jason really went a long way. Was there anything else from Forever Red that you wanted to talk about?
Let's see. The fight choreography, like we have this huge long unmorphed fight, which is pretty cool, that showcases everybody doing stuff. And the first person that they kind of showcase with all of these is JDF. And another reason why people regard Tommy so highly is because a lot of those stunts and a lot of these on more fights, especially in the early days, was the actors doing it. It wasn't stunt people.
Hmm.
There was a legit martial arts culture amongst the people that they cast. Like they cast actual people who had like very high skills, high level skills in martial arts to be able to do all these things. And so a lot of the times when they're doing flips and kicks and all this other stuff, it's actually them doing it. And so with JDF, you look at him, it's like, yeah, he's probably the best to do this. Like and it's kind of a shame that he didn't do other things and other projects similarly. Like he could have been like a Jason Statham. He could have done something like that with his career. He chose not to, and there were circumstances why he didn't. But you could if he went on to do something like that, it wouldn't have surprised anybody, and because he was that good. And and it's also why he had a beef with Jean Claude Van Damme. I don't know if you knew about that, but that's a thing. They almost fought like for real, which I think is hilarious.
No, I was not aware of that. I'll have to
Yeah,
have to do a little googling after this.
yeah, that's a thing. They had beef.
Interesting. I guess the two other things that stood out to me, I had alluded to this earlier. The absence of Rocky, that was a bummer.
Yeah, and apparently they couldn't get a hold of him
I
because he
read that in the
moved.
trivia or something. Yeah.
Yeah, like he had moved, and back then, like just with technology, it's like you move someplace, like they couldn't find you. But that. I don't know how much effort they put into finding him, though. That's the other bit, and so it's so I was glad and grateful to see him not only in Dimensions in Danger, but also in Once and Always as well. Like they're kind of making up for lost time there. And he, obviously he's been cool about it. Like Rocky, just he's Steve seems like a really nice guy. And so hopefully he wasn't too bummed about it. But as a character on the show, he got a raw deal. Like they broke his back in the movie and then replaced him with a kid. It's like, what are we doing? And then in the Forever Red, like they bring back, of course it's all ADR stuff and a guy in a suit, but they bring back the Aquatar Ranger. It's like nobody liked that guy. So it's like, come on.
I know. It's like even if it had just been a quick call to Rocky, something like I had
Yeah.
Rocky, like he can't join us for the battle, but he was checking on something for us and he's got some information, like anything,
Yeah, he has some information, something.
even just a mention of him, like anything,
Yeah. But
anything
they
would have been
just but they
fine.
just don't. And the crazier part about all this, another behind the scenes thing, Leo, the Lost Galaxy Ranger, was added in post. Um
I read
a
about
lot
that.
of
He
those
had he
things.
had some issues, right, with the production. There was some drama or something like that?
No, he was in law school.
Oh, oh, okay. Well, all right.
So his story is interesting because he, gets on Power Rangers and he's like, well, cool. This is gonna this is gonna be how I pay for law school. And then he does. He's a lawyer. I've seen there's a cool picture of his office. It's like on one side there's all, of course, like all the law books that you would see in a lawyer's office. The other side is the shelf with a single piece of every bit of Red Ranger Lost Galaxy merchandise on the other. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. He's just sitting there in a power suit. And so, yeah.
That's amazing. So I spent almost a decade in law school admissions and I read a lot of personal statements. Some more interesting than others, but that would have stood out. I was a Power Ranger and
Yes.
that's how I'm paying for law school. That's
Uh-huh.
fantastic. I love that. Oh, the other thing was in that unmorphed battle on the moon base, it was so funny to me that most of them are doing all these martial arts moves. And then you see, is it the Lightspeed Rescue Ranger who's just
Yes.
blasting? He's just
That's what he
blasting
does,
away.
man.
It's, I,
That
I loved it. I was like,
Carter is guns blazing all of the time. I love it.
I'm watching it. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's cool to see the martial arts, but it's like, guys, just blast them. Like, what are we going through this whole
That's
dance for?
Yeah, that's him as a character. Like on Lightspeed Rescue, that's what he was like.
Yeah. No, it was cool. I'm so glad that they did that. I'm sad I missed out on it the first time around. And again, even without having that familiarity with all of the characters, it was still such a cool event. And watching it now, yeah, it was a ton of fun. Of course, now we're at the point where not every time, as I've noticed, but in a lot of instances, right, the Zords are rendered via CGI and
Mhm.
not the best. Not the best.
No.
That's one thing about these later seasons that I long for for
Yeah,
the
I miss
style
the
of the
people.
original.
I miss the people in the boxy suits.
Yeah, and also too, it's like when you think about how Serpentera looked on screen the first time around when they did the
Hmm.
power transfer and they're trying to get the sword and all of that. It's like it was so imposing and so badass.
Yes.
And you look at it here, the CGI version, and it's like, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
you know. I'm sure I know I mentioned this when we talked about Serpentera the first time around. That's not only is that a toy I never had, I never even knew that existed.
It.
Of course it would, but I never even saw it. I don't think I ever once saw it at a store, so I
I never
definitely
did
never
either.
had it.
I
Yeah.
never did either.
You and I had been messaging about another Zord that we had never owned as kids, right? Titanus.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Are there?
I never.
Yeah.
I've seen that around, and every now and then I like kind of think that I'm gonna just say screw it and buy it, but I don't because every time I see it, it's like $400, and I'm like, I just can't. I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do it. As much as cool as it would be, if like I think harder about if it was three, like I can almost justify it. I can almost justify it. But I can't do it for four. I can't.
It's tough. So I recently made a fairly substantial purchase of Superman in the Golden Age omnibus hardcovers.
I
They
saw.
they were all on
Congratulations.
they were all on sale. They were all on, they were all on sale, but significantly on sale, I might add. But still, it was an investment. But it's like I'll read these and I'll do episodes of my Superman podcast on them. Like I'll get something out of them. Or even, and as a fellow podcast, like we invest in equipment for the shows that we're going
Yeah.
to do, like stuff we're going to use. But I'm with you. It's hard. It would be hard for me to pull the trigger on something that it would be to display. And I say this as someone, if you look behind me, I've got
Yeah.
my pops and my statues, and I've sold a lot of statues over the years, but I've had a lot of comic book statues, so I get it. But yeah, at this point, especially as a husband and father, it's like it's kind of hard to be like to drop it on that. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, the Titanus, if I remember correctly, I feel like I wish I had a stronger memory of it, but I feel like there was a local store, Dragon's Den, in my nearby town, and I feel like they had it, but by the time we got there, it had sold out, or they were supposed to hold it, but they did. I feel like there was
Mm.
something that went awry. Like I came close to getting it, but then it fell through. That's one that when we talk about the toys, that's one that I kind of always felt like I missed the boat on, but it's okay.
Yeah. No, I'd love to have it. Like I. The funny thing is, like I kind of was setting myself a goal. I was like, you know what? I'll collect the Zordon era of things, and like I have the most recent Astro Mega ship. Right? It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. I love it. But I'm like, but I don't want all the Zords from that series. And then like thinking about some other ones, it's like, well, really don't want those either. But I also kind of like about it's you understand this like you're a completionist, but at the same time you're kind of thinking is like, well, do I really need it? Maybe I'll have a certain thing. It's like it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. Huh. Yep. No, I
And then
identify.
availability for some of these things, it's just hard.
I hear you. So Forever Red is 2002. Then in 2004, Jason David Frank returns to the franchise for the entire Dino Thunder season as Dr. Tommy Oliver. So he put his race car days behind him
Hmm.
and he got his PhD in paleontology, and
Yeah.
he's been working on combining dinosaur DNA with technology. It's all very, very advanced stuff here.
He obviously never watched Jurassic Park, apparently.
If ever there were a cautionary tale, it's like, bro, what are you
Exactly.
doing?
And especially since it was referenced in the movie when they were on that planet. But yeah, he did not heed any of the warnings. So I don't know why he was surprised by any of the events that happened on Dino Thunder.
But this was huge. I mean, I guess we're seeing somewhat of a repeat of this in this upcoming season of Cosmic Fury, where David Yost
Hmm.
returns as Billy full time in this mentor
Yeah.
role, which is awesome. But otherwise, this is, I mean, to my knowledge, is there any other instance of something like this in the franchise's history where a Ranger comes back in this kind of capacity later on?
No. Um, and I mean, I guess you can't really count Billy and Zio just being like auxiliary until he leaves. But at this point, no, it was never like that. And the funny thing is, I didn't know he was coming back in 2004, and and the only reason why I knew was because I watched the pilot before. Because so 2004, this is now my senior year of high school, right? And um, due to the blessing of being a senior, I had first period off, and so what did I do in the morning? What was part of my routine? I watched Power Rangers before I went to school, and oh, while eating my breakfast. And so the pilot of like I was kind of in the Ninja Storm. I was like, okay, this is fun. It's kind of whatever. And then and then I was like, all right, we're going to see this next season. And then it starts, and I'm like, Tommy, and I'm like, holy crap. And then I was like, he's going to actually be in this. And I was like, oh man, I'm showing up for this every day. And I was so glad to catch it at that particular point in time, because that was a nice welcome surprise for myself.
It's a man, you and I would have gotten along in high school. You know, it's funny too because I wonder, like, I wonder if I had known you, like if I had had a Lance here in New York, as I was in my later elementary school and high school years. I don't know. Would I have continued with it? Because, like I always say, it's been hard for me to pinpoint exactly why I stopped. But I know at least a part of the reason was just that the kids that I used to talk to about it, like they just weren't into it. Like, people faded away from it, and I guess at that point, my interest too maybe faded enough where I couldn't sustain it on my own. But it's like I wonder if I had a friend who was like still watching it, maybe that would have changed things for me.
Maybe. Well, see, for me, like like everybody else, I developed other interests as well.
No, I know. I don't mean to. I don't
And
mean to paint you
yeah,
as like
yeah,
that's all you were
uh,
doing.
yeah. But like, but what I was, I guess, trying to say is like I just I just kept this one. It didn't. It like as I got other interests, I didn't like this didn't go by the wayside.
Right.
I kept it. I just didn't. It was just like something I just did like in secret. It was like a guilty pleasure type of thing. It's some because it became really evident very quickly after about you know 1998 or so that you couldn't talk about the fact that you were watching Power Rangers in public after a certain age. You couldn't do it, and so and if I did in later ages, because I remember like in college, it slipped out that I knew about Power Rangers and stuff like that, and I was like, oh yeah, that's my guilty pleasure. People just kind of rolled with it, and so but then now like I'm an old man, so I don't care. Like I make my own money, pay my own bills. I can watch what I want.
Yeah, man. No, for sure. But no, it's again, I wish I had a more of a memory of when this came onto my radar. I mean, I must have heard about it at some point that like Tommy was back, but again, I was so out of it that it was never anything that I really investigated. I feel like it was probably in more recent years where I watched clips on YouTube because I was just curious, like, oh, like Tommy back,
Ah,
later on. But so this was the first time I watched Day of the Dino, a nice callback to Day of the Dumpster from
uh-huh.
the original. But I watched the two-part opener, Day of the Dino. I watched the Legacy of Power episode, which was the 500th
The clip
episode.
show, yeah.
Yeah, where the new team finds this recording that Tommy has created, detailing the entire history.
Yes.
Where apparently Power Rangers is a TV show that anyone can watch. But you know what?
They come back to that later in Dino Thunder. Oh, do you know
Oh, they
about
did.
that?
No, no, no.
They watch a Sentai episode of themselves, and it's very meta. It's very funny. You should check that one out.
I'll have to look at that. Here's the thing, though. I was okay with. I know I've used this example before, but it's like the original Saved by the Bell series.
Mhm.
In the final season, they graduate, and then there's another episode where it takes place like 10 years in the future, and Belding's got a new crop of students, and they find an old VHS tape from Zach and the gang, and they pop it in, and Zach's like, "Hey, everyone! Like, we filmed our lives at Bayside, and here's what we were up to,"
Yeah,
and it's like it's insane. It's like you want us to believe like you were filming this whole time? Like
yeah, I know, right?
it's insane. But the thing with this, I'm okay with this because I feel like there's we know the viewing globe, right? So I feel like there's some viewing globe technology or whatever, something akin to that, that's allowed all of this to be captured and presented in this form. And I could get on board
Yeah,
with that. I'm okay with that.
yeah. It's either that or the clips are a visual representation of him telling the story.
Yes. All right. Go with that. But no, it's again, it's like it's amazing. It's this whole again when we talk about why Tommy Oliver has achieved this legendary status. I think I think he would have had it anyway, but by virtue of everything else we talked about. But this further cements it because it's this whole new chapter and this whole new role for him as this
Mhm.
mentor. And as far as the path that he's taken here, where he, and I don't know if it was in any of the episodes that I watched, but it is established he went to MIT, right?
I think so. Yeah.
So he goes to MIT. Becomes a doctor of paleontology. He's involved in all of this dinosaur technology splicing. Uh, it's quite a turn for the character. I mean, did this feel in keeping with Tommy Oliver for you?
It it kept in the sense that like I think what his end game was like he would never like really say it, but um, and I think you can infer it from reading Soul of the Dragon. He wanted to keep being a ranger, and he wanted to keep finding a way to do so. And so the only way he figured that he could do this, like, well, I got to go to college. I gotta get like I gotta get good at science. I gotta get into this stuff. And like when I came on, the team had dino powers, so let's like they're extinct, so we can probably use something like that. Let's try to do something here, because I think he has this complex and this is addressed in the book that we'll talk about later, like where he feels that he is responsible for keeping people safe and doing stuff. And the only way he knows how to do that is be a ranger. And so I don't think he wasn't as into cars as much to go back to the turbo well. And then the Zeo thing might be exhausted at this point. Who knows? Right. So he's just like, well, let's go back to the well. Let's go back to the start. Let's harness the power of the dinosaur and let's get this thing cracking. And I think that's what it was.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, because what I was going to say, and I know this is nitpicky, but it's like he a year earlier or 2 years earlier he
Yeah.
was he was back
He
in
still has, yeah,
and there's no
and he still
mention
has
of,
the Zeomorpher. Yeah.
is there ever any, because there certainly wasn't in the few episodes that I watched, was there any mention of that throughout Dino Thunder, that he was like very recently still operating as the Zeo
No,
Ranger and still had access to that power? Yeah,
no,
it's interesting.
no. They never say it. The only thing, like, there's Kira finds the picture, like a cast photo, but like it's a picture of the team, and like he kind of has a brief moment to reminisce about like those are the best friends he ever had, stuff like that, and then they kind of move it aside. But you could tell like him looking at that picture that he misses them. He misses doing that stuff, and this happens like I think right before happens after he's already been a ranger, but he's not in this. It's not the same, right? It's never the same. You can never go back. You can never go home again, right? It's that.
Yeah. So he does. So it's a team initially of three, of Connor and Ethan and Kira, and he takes them
Mhm.
under their wing. They get the Dino Gems. They become Rangers. It takes a few episodes, and it's not until the Back in Black episode, appropriately titled, where Tommy
Yep.
himself gets hold of one of these Dino Gems and becomes the Black Ranger, a Ranger once more. Our mutual friend and previous guest, Rob O'Connor from the All Star Superfan podcast, he's a big fan
Shout out to
of.
Rob.
Shout out to Rob. He's a big fan of the Dino Thunder season. And I said to him, I was like, I'm not doing an entire episode on it. I said, but we are going to talk about it. I said, if you would like to send in some clips, we would love to hear from you. So he sent in a few clips. I'll play them and we'll get our reactions. He talked initially about how, like myself, like he was out of the franchise, but he remembers reading about this on forums and wanting to check it out. And he's really become a fan of the Dino Thunder season. So here's our first clip from Rob talking about his impressions of Dino Thunder.
Nostalgia is a dangerous thing. I think a lot of shows and movies rely on it as a crutch, especially now. And, you could make the case that Dr. O, as he's so often called in Dino Thunder, probably could have been any previous Power Ranger or even a brand new character. Did he need to be Tommy Oliver? Probably not. That being said, they do tie in a lot of the kind of legacy mythology elements into his arc on the show, and there's that wonderful episode where he has this kind of he's trapped in a coma and he has these visions of his former ranger incarnations, and he fights the White Ranger and the Green Ranger, and it's absolutely badass stuff. And JDF, obviously, God rest his soul, he's just incredible throughout. Could they have done more with the legacy elements? Probably. But back then when you didn't really have these legacy sequels or returning characters from decades ago that you have now every other week, it seems, it was a big deal that they brought Tommy back. And that to me is probably what really brought me back into the fold in terms of Power Rangers, and really made me realize that this wasn't just this throwaway thing for kids, that there is this mythology that people have really worked to sustain and kind of maintain and keep alive. And I think Tommy is kind of the linchpin of all of that.
So I want to get your take, especially because it's funny. I wasn't really thinking about this as I was watching Dino Thunder, and then I listened to him talk about how like it really could have been anyone, and it's like, yeah, I mean, right, could have been. And when you think about could it have been anyone else or should it have been anyone else? I mean, we talk about the science side, right? Like, it would have been perfect for Billy.
Yeah, it's perfect for Billy. But as he said, nostalgia is something that kind of really ties everything together. Everybody remembers Tommy very fondly, and without Tommy, would the season have had the buzz that it did? No, it would have had a little bit if it was any of the other Rangers. But Tommy, right? Like, and especially because you don't really expect him to be a mentor figure at this particular, like especially coming back to do something like that. And so I think that was the draw. I was just talking about this today. In a group chat, but nostalgia, right? It gets thrown around a lot. People have very strong reactions to its presence in a lot of the media that we consume today. But as the great Don Draper said in Mad Men, nostalgia is potent but delicate, right? And when you use it correctly, it has very high potency and it works wonders. That's what it was here, right? Like the nostalgia was just enough, and it didn't distract from the season because it easily could have, but it didn't. If anything, it was an additive. It added towards the season. It didn't subtract from it, and that's the difference. If it was like the saying, it could have been anybody, any other Ranger. If they put like Bulk and Skull in here, it would have been a distraction, right? Almost kind of like it was in Samurai when Bulk was back. Like for the first time, it was like, okay, cool, Bulk's here, but like he has no connection to these new kids, right? So that's why it was a distraction. And so that's the difference. The fact that it was used correctly. All these things like that most people complain about with certain things. If it's done correctly, and it's done tastefully, and done with care and done responsibly, it's just fine. People only complain about certain aspects of things when it's done poorly, like cameos and nostalgia bait and all that other type of stuff that people complain about with media. It's when it's done correctly, and if it's done correctly, nobody says anything. Everybody appreciates it.
No, that's true. I know. I think that's a great point. And when Rob brings up how they probably could have leaned into the legacy aspect more for for myself watching this specifically for Tommy, yeah, would I probably I appreciated a little bit more of that, sure. But I think there's enough, and I think they did strike a really nice balance here where you get something like fighting spirit, which Rob was alluding to, where Tommy's in a coma and he's fighting in his mind, right? He's fighting to live and he's fighting the past versions of himself. So you get to see his various Ranger forms, except Turbo.
Except for Turbo.
But he's fighting his other Ranger forms. So, you get stuff like that. But at the same time, I think for people who hadn't watched those original seasons, we would just be on board with Dino Thunder, and it works, right? So I think they did strike a good balance. Rob continues here talking more and brings up an interesting point, kind of about how he views this season, especially in relation to the original Mighty Morphin era.
Dino Thunder is kind of a stealth remake of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in that you're dealing with a core cast of 3 teenagers. They are teenagers with attitude this time. They actually are kind of dysfunctional. They have very different personalities. They come from different worlds, figuratively, not literally. And the show follows them as they become Power Rangers, and then they become closer to each other and they become friends over the course of the season. All the while, their mentor is this legendary Ranger, Tommy Oliver. And, while I think the legendary Ranger aspect of it, it could be argued that it could have been any character. I think it's particularly special that it is Tommy, and they do some really special stuff with it. And it's a really watchable season of Power Rangers. It's really, really holds up. The villain Mesogog is actually kind of terrifying for a kids show, unlike a lot of your other villains from Power Rangers.
It's so funny with the villain because when all this kicks off and Tommy's talking about how he was working with his partner Anton Mercer, and then Mercer disappeared, and then this Mesogog villain showed up. I was like, oh, of course, Anton's going to end up being him, and he is. But because I did watch a little, I skipped around a little bit. Anton is Mesogog, but he's being possessed essentially by him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that was like a nice little spin on it where it's like, okay, no, there's still someone to be saved within here. And it went still somewhat predictable, but it added that little wrinkle to it, which I thought was
Oh
cool,
yeah,
you know?
for sure, for sure. And it's funny, like you mentioned that it's kind of like a soft, like, redoing of the Mighty Morphin thing. I picked up on that immediately. I was like, oh, we're back in high school, because for a while they weren't. They were either they were adults, like, and just kind of living life, or they were part of some like organization, and like they were off in space doing other things. Like they had their own agency. They weren't like kids for a good stretch of time. And so when we get to this season, it's like, oh, they're back to actually being in high school, where the secret identity is like a little bit more. A little bit more, much more of a bigger deal, and and then they played on the trend at the time for teenagers in shows where they don't get along at first and then they grow to get along, because back in the day, like especially like in the early 90s, but like the 80s and stuff like that, shows that featured teens, they were all together. They were all like, they like when you meet them, it's like, all right, we have this close knit group, and either they're dealing with an outsider or somebody leaving. That's always the thing. The only thing that kind of broke the mold on that was like the Breakfast Club, where they like come to, like disparate parts come together. But outside of that, like when you see people, like for example, like Saved by the Bell, like what you referenced earlier, they were all friends already, right? Even Screech, they were even friends with Screech. So, and so with this one, like the trend at the time, especially in the early part of the 2000s, you had people who were kind of disparate, and then they come together. That was the new trend, and so that all tracks.
Yeah, I that's the thing, we always joke about how in the original it's like teenagers with attitude, and it's like they're such good kids. It's like, what how much
Yes.
attitude are we really talking about here? And you watch this, and yes, it's still within the confines of Power Rangers, right? So it's nothing too extreme, but they do have, relative to the original group, a little more edge to them, right? Like Kira is this
Yeah.
angsty musician. Ethan is reprogramming, he's hacking in and reprogramming the school sprinkler systems. He's real class clown there. Connor just wants to play soccer, blow off
Yeah.
class. But yeah, it's like they've got that little bit more of an edge, and they are very different personalities, and they do spend time showing you how they're coming together in a way that was just sort of taken for granted the first time around. So I really did appreciate that, and I like that dynamic. Uh, Again, I think we've hit on a lot of, at least from the few episodes that I watched. Certainly, fighting Spirit when he fights all of his past selves. I did really
Mhm.
like. I think it was in the Back in Black episode after he gets the powers. There's a bit at the end where he's like, "Oh, I have to go shopping, and I noticed I don't have a lot of black in my closet." And it's like, "Oh,
Yep.
there we go." I loved that meta acknowledgement of of the attire, because as far as I know, I don't know that it was ever in the original. We always joked about it, but I don't know that it ever really came up from the characters. So I thought that was a nice touch. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was funny, and I appreciate the meta ness of that.
I've been just a couple more clips from Rob. I want to play one where he talks about the Disney of it all, because this was during the period of the franchise's history where Disney owned Power Rangers.
Hmm.
And well, I'm almost reluctant to play because we're at this point in time with these strikes going on where I don't
Yeah.
want to share anything positive about Disney. But no, it's interesting. And I want to get your take on this as well, because again, this was a whole era that I sat out. So
Okay.
let's hear this from Rob.
Tommy's post-turbo journey, it's kind of the thing that ties Power Rangers together as it goes on. And I think Dino Thunder is probably the best example of that. You had Disney coming in; they just bought Power Rangers from Saban, and they were doing their own thing with it. And then, rather than just forge a completely new vision, they brought back this familiar element from when it was the biggest thing in the world. And it's funny in a way, because so often now Disney is sort of derided by fans as this huge corporation that steps in and buys these properties like your Star Wars, your Marvel, your Indiana Jones, and then they supposedly drop the ball and ruin them. Whereas with Power Rangers, I think they did right by Power Rangers. There's a lot of really celebrated seasons of Power Rangers under the Disney era before they handed it back to Saban, and Dino Thunder is a big part of that.
So again, I would say I'm largely ignorant of this chapter in the franchise's history, but the lineup, is that generally kind of the consensus about this Disney period?
Yeah, people look on it pretty fondly, and that's he's right. Like Disney gets a lot of a lot of crap for a lot of reasons. Everybody wants to blame them for everything. Like not all of the world's ills are because of Disney. I mean, that is a fact. Now, do they do shady stuff? Of course they do, because they're a mega conglomerate. Every mega conglomerate does shady stuff. But one of the things they did right by was Power Rangers, because they didn't really miss. Like they did some good stuff during it.
Right on. And just some parting words from Rob. And he has some kind words about the podcast. So this is a little self-serving, but bear with me.
I just want to thank Anthony once again for not only asking me back to offer my thoughts, but for doing such an amazing, such a specific podcast as well. It's not just a podcast for fans of Power Rangers. It's a podcast for fans of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers who maybe drifted away but still have nostalgia for those original years. What a concept. What a great job. I've enjoyed listening to all the episodes. So thank you so much. May the power protect you always.
I appreciate those kind words. And I feel like and I'm sure you identify with this as well doing your podcast and getting reactions from people. It's like, I mean, I don't disagree with him at all, but it's like, I don't know that I would have described the show necessarily in that way, but as he's saying it, it's like, yeah, that's true. And clearly, as I've come to see, even just talking to you, it's like, I recognize there's a range of fans and folks like yourself who have continued watching over all of these years. And then folks like myself and like Rob who fell out of it. And that's probably who this show speaks to most, like where we're reliving those memories and rewatching it with adult eyes. But I appreciated getting that take from Rob, because it's like, yeah, that's really what the show has been and probably who it appeals to most. So I appreciate those kind words, and I appreciate Rob sending in his thoughts about DINO Thunder. What else about DINO Thunder? I know, again, we watched specifically the Back in Black and the Fighting Spirit episodes, either from those episodes or just kind of anything else, especially Tommy centric from this season. Was there what else stands out to you, or did you want to talk about?
Well, Tommy has good moments with each of the individual Rangers throughout the season, where he is a mentor to them and with whatever's happening, because he's seen it all and done it. And so when they were struggling with certain things, because each Ranger has an episode of it that's them focused. A good example is when Connor wants to leave the team to do something else, like he talks to him about that. He's like, as somebody who's left a team and come back. When Trent shows up as the auxiliary, the next Ranger, like he becomes the fifth Ranger, but like his role in this is the sixth Ranger, who was bad for a time, and spoilers, and comes and becomes good. He has experience with that. He helps, and so stuff like that. Like you could see him almost fatherly, but towards them. He takes big responsibility in their well-being and making sure that they're on the right path. And it's cool to see. It's a different form of leadership, because he's been a leader of a team before, but this is different when you're in charge, and you're the teacher of record, which he actually is, both literally and figuratively in this case.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, look, I'd be lying if I said, I'll probably sit down and watch all 30 episodes or whatever of DINO Thunder, but I did enjoy. I mean, I genuinely enjoyed what I watched. And again, I mentioned the close bit. I thought that was funny. I thought it was great too when he first becomes the Black Ranger and the villain says, "Tommy, like, aren't you a little old?"
Elsa. Yeah.
And he's like, "I may be old, but I can still pull it off." And what's so funny to me is this whole bit about him being old. I'm like, how old was he?
So at this point, he's like, I think he's supposed to be like 31.
Yeah.
And it's just like, he's not old at all.
He's not. I know he's not old at all. I'm like, he's like 5 years younger than I am now, and it's like he's like this old man.
Exactly.
But that was so funny. I guess the other thing that struck me, and that's why I wrote down the years of all of these things, because he leaves Turbo in '97, and then this DINO Thunder season is 2004. Like it's not that. I mean, I don't know, 7 years. I guess it's relative. I mean, in the span of the 30-year franchise history, not that long.
No.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just like looking at it. It definitely feels like a whole different iteration of the character and a different and a different era. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And like you said, by the end of the season, they deplete their powers in defeating Mesagog, and he sticks around as a teacher, right? At the end,
he does. Yeah, that's what his profession is. Actually, and you know what? I'm wrong about the age, because if 1997 to 2004, 7 years. In 1997, his character was 18. That would make him 25 as a teacher here. So he's not that old. I don't know why they were making him seem like an old man.
There was well, it was, you know what it was? His
But
I looked
JDF was 31 at the
Yes,
time.
that's what it was. Yeah. But I know you're right in the context of the character's age. I know. It's like that's insane. This
Yeah.
old man. Yeah. So crazy enough, though, we talk about the span of time. So that's the 2004, and then it's 10 years later until he returns in the Super Mega Force season for the Legendary
Mhm.
Battle, which I watched the. This was not part of our official homework, but I ended up while I went on it was on a roll and I watched the extended edition of the Legendary Battle,
Okay.
and I enjoyed it a lot. Real quick, I think you had said off mic you really like the nautical themed outfits for that team of
Love them.
Rangers.
Love them.
Me too. And what's funny is, so in our last episode, as I was griping a little bit about Turbo, I was saying how you have Divatox, the space pirate, this
Yeah.
whole pirate nautical theme, and then
Yeah.
race cars. And I was like, they should have gone like a nautical themed ranger suit would have made sense. And then I'm watching this, I'm like, this would have been perfect.
It would have
This
been
was what I
perfect.
would have wanted. That would have kind of married those two together nicely. So I was a fan of it. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Shout out to Hilary Shepard too, the actress that plays Divatox. I met her at a Star Trek convention actually, um, and she was like, when I came up to her booth, she was like, Divatox or Star Trek, and I was like, Divatox, and she gave me a hug. She's like, yes, she really enjoyed playing Divatox, and so I was like, this is really cool.
Yo, it shows. It shows. I mean, she brought a lot. She brought a lot to
Yeah.
that. I mean, look, when we talked about it, it's like, was it my favorite outing for Power Rangers? No, but she was a ton of fun and made me enjoy that character far more than I think I would have just on paper. So,
Yeah.
props to her for sure. The other thing with Super Mega Force, and again, I'm looking at it for the first time, but this whole idea of them being able to access the powers and Zords of past Rangers, I like that. Did you enjoy
Yeah.
that as the season played out? Was that a cool
I
take?
No, I thought that was cool. And again, it was another thing. It was another carrot to keep me watching that season because, as I mentioned off mic, that one was a struggle. With the exception of a couple of things, that season, those two seasons were a struggle. And so when we got to the super portion, the possibility of seeing, oh, what powers are they going to use? How is it going to be related to the monster that they're fighting? I thought that was kind of cool. How, if it was like, for example, we're going to use the RPM powers because of this particular villain, or we're going to use the Equations power for this type of thing. It was cool to see them do that in those type of contexts. Now, were they as smart about it as they could have been? No, but it was still cool nonetheless.
Right on. No, I hear you. The legendary battle was cool. So essentially, you have this massive alien armada invading,
Yeah.
and the Rangers initially fall, and all hope is lost. But they're able, of course, to rally. And I don't know if this is in the regular cut. Definitely, it's in the extended where you see the legendary Rangers saving people in their civilian guises, right? And then you get like the quick
Hmm.
helmet flash, so you see
Yeah.
who they are, including Tommy. He saves a little boy. And he hands over Saba for him to grab
Hmm.
onto, and it's like, so that was a nice touch. And then again, you get to that big climactic battle, and you see all of the legendary Ranger teams show up, and we only see a few of them with their helmets off, but including
Yes.
JDF front and center as the green
Uh-huh.
Mighty Morphin Ranger. It was
Yep.
a cool moment.
It was very cool. And again, like, I saw the trailer for the legendary battle, and of course, Troy's character. So it's like, I had this dream. He talked about it in the very beginning of Megaforce, and like I see them in that little wedge formation. I was like, this is going to be the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then I had to wait 2 years for that.
I know they really kept you hanging there, but
They really did.
hopefully it was a worthy payoff. I know one of the things that's been complained about, and I think we've reconciled a lot of this when we see Mighty Morphin, we see Zeo, and we've talked about how they could potentially have their powers and all of that. I guess the other question that's begged here is, are there enough people to account for all of these different range? Like, I guess in the context of the Pink Ranger, for example, like I know I'm overthinking this, but it's like in theory, like let's say Kimberly is the Mighty Morphin, Cat is the Pink Zeo
Yeah.
Ranger, but then Turbo and Space, wasn't it? I mean, it was Cat and then Cassie for
Yes.
for Space as well, right?
Yes.
So it's like, how do we sort that out? That we had both of them there.
Whew. It's a good question. Well, there is. You could say between Turbo, Space, Galaxy, there's three Pink Rangers you could use. Um, so you know, like so the powers could be given to a couple of different people to make that work. Because remember, Astronema becomes a Pink Ranger,
Oh,
at some point, in Lost Galaxy. Um, so there's some ways you can kind of move the pieces around the chessboard to make that fit because there's an extra person around. So it can make sense. People who've seen stuff know what I'm talking about because you have you have Kendricks, who's the Pink Ranger that dies, but then she comes back because she comes back, and Cassie and Astronomer. So between the three of them, you could fill that spot.
right on. No, it was a cool thing, and it's we talked about how cool it was to have Forever Red and all the Red Rangers together, but now to have all of the teams, uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just a cool
Yeah,
moment. It really plays into this whole legacy aspect, and again, this idea that they're all still out there and active, or at least on reserve
yeah,
status and able to be activated. So definitely opens things up.
yeah, and helping when they can, and helping when they can and when they're needed. Right? They don't do what most people want to do with heroes and stuff is to have them go away for a while and then come back grizzled and all this other stuff. It's like no, they're doing other stuff, but when their number is called, they go out.
Right. Yeah. No. 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 For sure. And then, of course, a few years later, 2018, during the Ninja Steel season, we have Dimensions in Danger, which, as we said before, was JDF's last on-screen appearance as Tommy. And the episode opens on Tommy getting out of his truck and walking into the house, and he's on the phone with. We don't know who he's on the phone with, but now we can fill in the gaps. And
Hmm.
he was talking to Kat, and uh, he's talking to his son JJ, right, in the house, and we just hear
Yep.
JJ's voice. And so that's our. I mean, that's the thing. As much as he came back in for the legendary battle, it's like now we're filling in some more blanks as far as what his life has actually been like in all this time.
Hmm. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Um, but that's not what people came for. They came for Tommy versus Tommy, right? That what 2.5 minute stretch. Like I remember like watching that, I was like, this is dope. And then I remember going on Twitter like afterwards, and this is like still part of Twitter's prime. Like when it was for the most part it was all fun. There was no it was all fun and games at that particular point in time, and like Tommy was trending right because of that fight, and like people were having a good time with it. It was so cool. Like all the different like people that and Master Morpher were trending at this particular point in time because that blew people's minds. So it's like this is so cool, and it was.
It was really tremendous. I mean, you have, Lord Draven has created this robotic version of Tommy and is using him to abduct other Rangers and create this robotic Ranger army. And so among those who've been captured are Kat and Rocky, and help me out with the others. Some of the others.
Uh, uh, Cat, Rocky, Mia, I know for sure. Wes
TJ?
and
Was
TJ
he?
is
Yeah,
one of them. Those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head.
gotcha. But no,
There's a
it was.
couple others.
I mean, it's amazing when he busts out that Master Morpher and starts morphing into all of the different, with the exception of Turbo, all of the
Yep.
different Rangers that he's been. And of course, this aired August 2018, and then the Soul of the Dragon original graphic novel was December. It came out in December 2018, so very close in time. But this was right. This was the first instance of the Master Morpher.
Yeah.
Yeah, so cool. I mean, I can imagine
Very cool.
how that blew people's minds, but
Blue
it's so
Mine.
cool. And again, especially it's like, and again, we talk about the reasons why Tommy stands out so much. Like he's been all of these different Rangers, and now
Yes.
you get to see him. We've seen him fight those different versions in his mind in Fighting Spirit and
Hmm.
Dino Thunder, but now to get to see him to be able to access the powers of all of these Rangers he's been over the franchise's history. It's such a badass moment. It's so cool.
It
It's just so
it
cool.
really is. And then and then like him starting it off with, it's like, if you don't have a master morpher, you ain't nothing but a cheap copy. It's just like, oh, it's about to go down. It's so, like, it's just so cool to see that going on, and it's like, oh man, he's about to whoop some ass, and that's exactly what happens.
I know. It's so cool. And he even calls upon the Falcon Zord
Yeah,
one last time.
one last time. We haven't seen the Falcon Zord in forever. Now, I probably would have like died of a heart attack if he called the Dragon Zord and we got to see that thing come up from the depths one more time. Because man, the first like I can't go back in time and like have other people experience what seeing that was like. Uh, when he first, because I'm telling you, man, when Tommy first burst onto the scene, that was the coolest thing that most people like at that particular point in time had ever seen on children's television. Like, period, end of story. And especially the way he's introduced, because it's like, oh, this guy's gonna kick Jason's ass in this competition. Because up until that point, Jason was the man, right? And then you see Tommy is like, oh no, not anymore. And then they fight to a draw, and then he gets the powers, and then we see him wreck the Power Rangers time and time again. And then when it's finally time for have a Zord, he doesn't have multiple ones. He has his own big one, and it just so happens to be like Godzilla as a Zord. I was like, this can't get any cooler. Like, all of those things wrapped up in the thing. It's like, and he gets Kimberly, like everybody's first crush. Like, it's like it's set up for it, right? Like, this is like, what a legendary journey and what a legendary beginning.
I know. It's again, I think we keep adding sort of to this answer of, why why he's the most legendary ranger. And I think this is another instance. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Dimensions in Danger, it was a ton of fun. And like we said, I know we're focusing on Tommy, but the fact that we had the return of Steve Cardenas as Rocky. He has very
Uh-huh.
little to do, but it's like, at least he's there. It was a nice moment. And I think, again, paved the way for his further return in
Yeah,
Once and Always. Right.
absolutely.
I'm trying to think. Oh, I mean, I guess the other thing with Dimensions in Danger, and I know the actors have talked about how they came up with this right on their own, where at the end they're all jumping through the portals to go back to their dimensions, and
Hmm.
Tommy and Kat are holding hands,
Yep.
right? So that was a nice touch because, again, so at the beginning of the episode, we know Tommy's got a son and he's talking on the phone to a significant other, but we're not told who it is. I mean, do you like? Was there? I mean, did they? Because I don't. Was it just that the actors took it upon themselves to like fill in that backstory, or what? Was there more that had been scripted or intended as far as a
I
romance between them?
I think they took it upon themselves because you know all the information that you need was already present. Um, Remember, like, I know the most iconic relationship on the show overall is Tommy and Kim, even though it should be Wes and Jen, but it's Tommy and Kim. And but remember, she breaks up with him
Oh yeah,
via a Dear John letter, and then right afterwards is Kat, who has been waiting very patiently, like to jump in on that. And so for the rest of Zio, it's very obvious that those two are a couple, right? Like they might be like still like in the beginning phases of it at that particular point in time, but they're a couple. You mentioned in one of your earlier episodes when you talked about when Sarah Brown came onto the show, like this whole snowboarding thing. That was so funny to me when that actually happened because I was like, "Are we doing a VR Troopers crossover?" Because that would have been super
yeah.
cool. Because and there's also like that whole drama with that because Jason David Frank, when he was done with Power Rangers, like the first time, when his character got written off the first time, was supposed to go over there and be the star of that. But people realized, like, no, people aren't going to watch Power Rangers anymore if Tommy's not back. And so they gave Ryan Steele to Brad Hawkins, who was going to be the White Ranger. So like they just swapped roles. And so that was kind of interesting that Sarah Brown shows up to try to get with Tommy. But no, like the writing was already on the wall. Like he and Kat were a thing, and that's like that's canonically accurate.
No, so here's the thing. Like I am totally on the Tomcat train. Like especially after that Dear John letter, I was pretty much done with
Yeah.
Kimberly
Uh
after
huh.
that. No, it's just that again, I mean, there so much time had passed, and during the whole Dino Thunder season, right? Obviously, there was no Cat. Was there ever any even mention of her or anything like that? I guess more. I guess I bring it up because it's like I don't know. In my mind, it wouldn't be such a given that Cat's the one on the other end of the phone at that point in time because so much time had passed, and we had a whole season
Yeah.
with Tommy, and there hadn't been any Cat. So that's all.
Yeah. And I was, and when Dino Thunder started, I was like, is it going to be Haley? And like, is that going to be like the person that, like, you know, there was a legit argument to be made for that, but we never hear from Haley ever again. So, um, but no, like it made sense that like that's after, you know, things settle down and everything. That's who he chooses to go back to, because Kat was all about it. So
Yeah. And then again, you know, to kind of bring us to the end of Tommy's journey here with the Soul of the Dragon original graphic novel. So here we get explicit confirmation, right? Kat is his significant other and is the mother of
yes,
JJ, and we'll get further confirmation on screen when we get to the Once and Always special, and she's talking about you know, going to pick up JJ or whatever.
hmm
So we get that further confirmed. But I had to tell you, this was the first time I read that Soul of the Dragon graphic novel, and I thought it was so much fun. It was, you know, again, like Old Man Tommy. It's the story that I wish we could have gotten to see on screen at some point, you know, and
yeah,
it's kind of a shame that it didn't. I know Jason David Frank was listed as a special consultant on this. Now,
hmm
I haven't done a full deep dive, but I mean, what is your understanding of how this came to be and what his role is? Because was it the case that he was trying to get something going on screen and it didn't materialize, and then it just sort of became this? Or
I think he was, and I think what ended up happening is it became Legend of the White Dragon or whatever, like that. I think that's what it ended up becoming. But at this particular point in time, Kyle Higgins was, you know, in the midst of deep in his bag writing Power Rangers, and he had struck up through his writing of it, struck up friendships with the Rangers, with the actors that play these characters, and to the point where like they filmed this thing, a trailer for the Shattered Grid event,
right.
and through that he and JDF struck up a friendship, and then that's when he started talking to him and pitched him about like doing a solo book about the end of Tommy's life and career, and JDF was a consultant on it.
Right on. So in this story, you know, it opens with Tommy's department at the school where he teaches getting cut. So they're having this farewell party. It's a very, very bittersweet note to
Yeah.
start on. And
Also, the most unrealistic thing that's ever happened in Power Rangers. They wouldn't cut a science program. You kidding me?
yeah, that felt like a
As somebody who's in
stretch.
education and who's had to deal with programs being cut and my funding getting taken away for the arts, they would not do it. They wouldn't take away science. They take away my stuff first.
Maybe, well, we can headcanon this. I mean, maybe it's not, maybe he was so specialized, they created like a paleontology department. So it's not like, oh, there's no science at the
Ah.
school. But he probably started a department where he was like, you know, teaching kids how to splice dinosaur DNA with
At
robots.
this point in the future, probably. You know what?
Pro-
That makes sense.
yeah. So we'll go with that. Yeah. If they were just fully like cutting all the science at the school,
Uh,
that would be rough.
yeah, the government would have to step in at that point. It's like, you can't do that.
Yeah. But it's again, very much that like Logan type of
Yes.
story here, where you know, he is with Kat, but she leaves for this trip to Triforia. You very quickly see there's this distance between Tommy and his son JJ, who's part of SPD, right? Space Force Delta, is that it?
Space Patrol Delta.
Space Patrol. I'm sorry. Yeah, SPD? Where'd I get the Space Force from? Um, but there's this distance between them, and then you know, JJ goes missing, and Sky, right? She's the one who reaches out to Tommy to ask for
No,
help.
that's Anara. Sky is the at this point he's the
Oh,
head
you're right. I
deputy in
taught. Yep,
charge
yep.
of SPD.
Inara, thank you. And you know, we learned that JJ had been investigating this, you know, this gang war that's been going on, and there's this character, the witch, who's been selling like a street drug that can bestow Power Ranger abilities on its users, and Tommy and Inara team up to try to find JJ. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, I just overall impressions. How you know, what's your take on Soul of the Dragon and the way it depicts Tommy and then ultimately resolves his story?
It's a cool story. I like the approach. It wasn't too dour, but you could definitely tell where they were going with it. You could tell like the mood of Tommy at this particular point, and it's kind of what I mentioned earlier. Like he has this, he can't quite shut it off. It's hard for him to retire, right? It's like, like he's trying to find something to do post Ranger this. And at this point, his body can't, you know, do it because he's, he has back injury, he has all these injuries and stuff. Like he can't do it anymore. And it's hard to kind of get over. And this is it was very Batman Beyond-y in this regard. And it doesn't surprise me considering that Kyle Higgins, got his feet wet in major comics doing Batman Beyond. And so when you have like a street drug giving powers and stuff, it's very much like the Splicers in that regard. So I appreciated that aspect. The witch, it's having you think one way. And then it zags, and it's a character when you have the reveal of the witch. It's like, oh, that's so neat! Like, that's so cool because that character was also a very popular character for a variety of reasons. And so that was pretty cool. The Finsterness didn't surprise me at that particular point in time because Kyle Higgins is a fan of Finster and he uses him like a lot for a lot of different things. Like that's a favorite character of his, which I think is very funny. And then the whole conflict with Tommy and his son, it makes sense. Like if with sons, their first hero is their father, right? And all sons at one point want to be just like their dad. And then in their effort to try and do so, they realize that, at some point they get to a point where they realize I can't be like my dad. And that's very frustrating to the son. And JJ's going through that. And it's that much harder when your father is like up on this pedestal and that everybody views him as, and you know that it's like you're not only chasing trying to be like the goal of just trying to be like your dad, but then you also have to try harder because your dad is like here, and it just makes it that much harder when they're on that type of a pedestal. It's like I couldn't imagine what it's like being Michael Jordan's son, like when he was growing up and like he wanted to go play basketball. I couldn't imagine that. It's impressive to see like LeBron James's sons. It's just like I was like, good for you guys because that's hard. Right? Or like imagine being like, I don't know, Yo-Yo Ma's kid trying to play cello. Like, why? It's so difficult. And so that's JJ's thing with being a Power Ranger.
No, well said. And from his perspective, that totally makes sense. What was resonating with me as I was reading it, looking at it from Tommy's perspective, and especially when you get to the point where Tommy and Inara see JJ pushing this drug, right? And we ultimately learn he's undercover, but it seems like he's fallen in with the witch.
Yeah.
And everything that Tommy's going through, it's like that definitely, right? Because as a parent, like that's the thing, you want to do everything you possibly can to set your child on the right path. And this notion of like doing everything you can and they still go astray.
Yeah.
And wondering if you can pull them back. I mean, that, really, really resonated. And, I think about that as a father myself now. And so that, that really stood out. I thought that was really strong. And then, you mentioned again, like we ultimately find out the witch isn't Rita at all, but is in fact Scorpina. And that was
so cool.
It was a great reveal because Rita would have been fine, but it was right. Especially when they call her the witch, it's like, of course she's the first one you think of. So to swerve to someone who we have that familiarity with and who has been off the board. And we get this account of she was, she had betrayed Rita and they banished her to this other dimension. And that's why she wasn't there for the Z wave. So that was, but what I really liked too, I thought this was super interesting going back to the Finster of it all. So Tommy and Finster are now friends and allies. He had been purified by the Z wave.
Yeah.
He's turned over a new leaf and great stuff between them. But at this point in time, it seems like the witch is Rita. And I think Tommy says, well, wasn't she purified too? And Finster's like, sometimes people are given a second chance and, essentially they squander it. They still make the wrong choices the second time around. Ultimately, I'm glad they went with Scorpina. I thought that was a cool reveal. But, if it had been Rita, I liked that explanation for it because it's like, just because they were quote unquote fixed once, nothing to say that this wouldn't happen again.
Yeah, it's very much like Dark Knight Returns with Two-Face getting his face fixed, right? It's kind of like that.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And then just as far as the fan service of it all, Tommy's got the Master Morpher. It's damaged. He can't control the order, right? So he has to morph in a set order, and every time he does, the coins are being destroyed. So he only has one morph of each ranger left.
Yeah.
And it's essentially we're going in
Reverse
reverse
order. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's great. So he's the Black Dino, and so on, so that that last morph is going to be Mighty Morphin Green.
Uh-huh.
So it was great this last ride, right, as each of these rangers that he's been. And I thought it was such a great touch because, of course, you expect, all right, he'll use that last morph and he'll be the Green Ranger. But instead, he tosses it to JJ. And I thought it was such a great moment.
That was really cool. A literal passing of the torch there.
Yeah. No, it was cool. And then, he and Kat at the end, they decide they're going to kind of take some time to themselves and figure out what comes next. And, have a real nice riding off into the sunset moment together as JJ goes back to action as the Green Ranger of SPD. It was I found it very satisfying. I liked it a lot.
It was very cool. Very well done.
The only thing, I don't know, it's like in one sense, it's like, oh, it would have been cool to have seen Tommy reach out to some of his old teammates or things like that. But that's not what this journey was. Again, I think this was very much that, again, Logan-esque solitary, but mostly solitary pursuit that he was on. So I was on board with that.
Yeah, because even in Logan, it's not like he's the last mutant. There are other mutants around, and there are mutants that are close to him that and recognize enough to where it's fine. You don't need to see Cyclops and Jean and Beast and all this other stuff. You have Professor X, you have Caliban. It's fine. Here, it's like the other Rangers that he interacts with are Rangers from the series. He interacts with Sky, who was in SPD, obviously, and God, the guy that likes the toast. Blanking on his name at the moment, but Chip. There we go.
Yeah.
No wait, that's Chip was Mystic Force. Bridge. That's his name. There we go. So yeah, you get to see him with other Rangers here, so it's fine. It doesn't need to be exact, but I'm sure they're around. I'm sure they know who he is and where he is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was very fitting too, bringing everything full circle when it seems like JJ has strayed, right, and has fallen in with this bad crowd. It's like Tommy's, yes, it was brainwashing, but Tommy has been on the other side, so
yeah, he knows.
And it was. You really feel for Tommy because I think he's talking to Anar and he's like, when I was under Rita's control, like I never hesitated. Right. But that was mind control. It's like JJ seemed to hesitate. But basically he was saying like I guess the hope was that JJ was being brainwashed and could be fixed. Right. Or that it could be undone. But at that point in time, it didn't seem like that was the case. Like he might have actually made this choice.
Yeah.
And, you felt for him in that moment. But it's going back to where we started with this. It's like if that's the end of Tommy Oliver's journey, I found it to be a fitting one. And I'm content with that as the end of the road for him.
I agree.
All right, my friend. Is there anything else that you want to say or talk about before we wrap it up here?
No, I think we covered a great bit.
We did. We were about 2-hour recording. I appreciate you coming along for this last ride here. We've mentioned your podcast, Always Hold On to Arrow. Is there anything you want to tell folks about it or anywhere in particular you'd like to direct them?
Season 6 is coming. So stay tuned, everybody.
Awesome. I hope people will tune in for that. Again, I thank you, Lance. I thank you to all of our guests and audience members. I really appreciate you being part of this podcast journey. The last thing that I'll say before we sign off here is that for most of my life, Power Rangers was something that was in the past for me. It was something that I watched and loved intensely as a kid, but wasn't a part of my life really moving forward. It was something I always looked back on fondly, but again, it was really in the past. And so I'm immensely grateful for this journey that I've been on with this podcast, because now this has brought Power Rangers very much back into my present.
Yeah.
And I'm immensely grateful for that. And again, I plan on watching the Cosmic Fury season with David Yost. I'm very curious about this reboot that we're getting, this Amy Jo Johnson comic, everything that's sort of in the mix. in a way that I wouldn't have been before. It would have been kind of on the periphery for me, and maybe I would have seen an article, and
Yeah.
that might have been it. But now I'm back in it, and it's something that's part of my life again in a way that I never thought would be. So I've gotten more out of this than I thought I would coming into it. So again, I've really enjoyed this journey, and again, I thank everyone who has been a part of it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for doing it. Thanks for having me be part of it.
My pleasure. All right. Thank you all. And for the final time, once a Ranger fan, always a Ranger fan. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all.